Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jake Wynn. I'm Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine and the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum. Coming at you for another live program this afternoon. I am joined today by my very good friend, the tattooed historian himself, John Heckman. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake, for having me on. It's weird not to be running the show for a change. It's nice to be interviewed and be able to do a presentation for you.
Yeah, we were really excited. I know that this is one of the topics is one of the many things in your repertoire and your area of interest. So you're doing a ton of great stuff with your own brand with the Tattooed Historian, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But it just seemed like a perfect opportunity for us to bring you on and let you be the sage on the stage, so to speak, and tell us about what you're some of the stuff that you're interested in.
Yeah, this is great. I have been interested in this subject, especially the food portion of it, for many years, and it's great to be able to talk about it because I love food, and I kind of have this side project where I love food history. So it's really cool to be doing that. And obviously, we're going to touch on hygiene as well, which you know more about some of that than I do, or a lot of that than I do. And I'm really looking forward to it because it's going to be a little bit different than what we usually have on either of our platforms.
Yeah, so John does, again, just a plug, and we'll talk about this a little bit with more detail. But if you have not yet followed the Tattooed Historian on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, where else are you, John?
Oh my gosh, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok. I just got on Twitch, Discord, YouTube. I'm all over the place, man. I'm on like 10 platforms now and trying to figure out the new demographics and who I'm going to reach next. So, but
It's fantastic.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are my big three.
Yeah, it's been great to see you doing some what is it, Ultimate Gettysburg, or Ultimate General.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
trying to think of the name of the
yeah.
game.
I've been putting it up on my personal page. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's some good history gaming stuff. Love
yeah,
that.
yeah. We're getting into that. Myself and someone you just had on, James Taub. We're talking about doing some historical gaming live streams here in the future together and talking about the authenticity in it and pop history and stuff like that. So that's probably the next step. Some,
Fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
video games are where it's at. I haven't played in a long time, but everyone thinks well, not everyone, but people think that I'm weird when I'm like, I watch other people play video games. And I'm like, no, it's all about the commentary. And especially if you're watching somebody play like a historically inspired game, there's a lot that you can really learn and take away from that.
Oh yeah, and we're seeing e-gaming really take off a lot now with sports games because there's no sports, and
Right.
so it's really interesting to watch how we are embracing new forms of media because of the world around us right now.
Yep. And speaking of the world around us now, so these videos that we've been doing and that John, the tattooed historian's been doing on his channels, because the museum can't be open, the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, we can't open our doors because of the pandemic right now. So we have switched over as of mid-March, we switched over to doing online programs and focused on, doing what we do, fulfilling our mission, and bringing that to all of you digitally. And so basically, we flipped a switch, learned lots of lessons from all of the crazy stuff that John's doing. I have to say that it's, whether it's equipment recommendations, which I was just asking John about
Yeah.
before we went live, or, strategies and ideas about ways we can format these things. We've been focusing on delivering this kind of content and coming to you where you are all at, hopefully at your homes, and staying inside and away from other people. And I know many of you are doing that and following what our public health experts are asking us to do in the time of this pandemic. But we've been doing these programs for about a month now, and our audience has been building. Thank you all so much out there for watching. I see we have about 94 people watching right now, which is fantastic. So thank you all out there for tuning in with us today. So if you are enjoying these programs, if you've been here before and watched some of our live streams in the past, please do consider becoming a member of the museum. We are a member-supported institution. Our members help to sustain us, allow us to fulfill our mission of telling the story of Civil War medicine and drawing the line between the past and the present. We really believe that in history, we can find hope. This is a pretty dark timeline that we are experiencing right now, the darkest timeline. This is a situation that, we aren't open for admissions right now. And so every little bit helps. So if you want to become a member, that's great. You'll find a link eventually in our comment section to where you can become a member. If you don't want to drop $35, I know that's a hard thing to do right now. You can also donate. Every little bit helps. So if you've been enjoying these videos, please consider doing that. For those of you who already have, thank you so much for supporting these programs. If you're already a member, already have donated, thank you so much. You have allowed us to continue to do these programs, allow us to continue to tell the story of Civil War medicine. If you are new here, welcome. To the National Museum of Civil War Medicine's live programming that we've been doing. We are focusing on doing these at least 3 times a week live streams. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We have been playing around with some of the times. So you'll find programs at 10 o'clock in the morning, in the 1 o'clock time slot like us. And sometimes you'll find programs on at about 4 o'clock and sometimes even as late as 7 or 8. So we have a variety of programs that we're being offered. You can find them on our website, civilwarmed.org, or you can go and like us on Facebook if you haven't already, and you'll get alerts about new programs and things that we are doing. So that is a lot to get out. So thank you all for tuning in with us. We are here with the tattooed historian himself, John Heckman, my great friend. And I just want to get in a little bit too, before we dive into the topic we're covering today, which is hygiene and nutrition in Civil War soldiers. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of what you bring to the history table? I think you bring a unique perspective and some great ideas.
Oh, thank you, Jake. I started out as a historian. I earned my BA and my MA in history from Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania, and I went on to work alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a historian and archivist. And about a year into that, I began the Tattooed Historian on Facebook. I used it as a way to showcase some of the archival things that we were finding. And I was really enjoying that process because we were doing what's called an archival assessment, and we were going through the archives and we were trying to see what was in the archive and the condition that it was in. So I was taking photographs of different artifacts and papers, documents, stuff like that to showcase to the public who may not be able to go and check those things out. And strangely enough, this thing blew up, and I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to get maybe 100 people to follow along and to also maybe find my next job. And as time went on, LinkedIn wasn't a sexy thing, so I was using Facebook, and everyone was on Facebook, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll use that. As time went on, it built up more and more and more, and I started getting on a couple more platforms. I started reaching out on Twitter and Instagram, and I went full time with this project in April of 2018. So I've been doing it full time for 2 years now, and what I wanted to do was make history accessible and have what I call friction-free history. There's no pay-to-play kind of thing or anything like that. And I also wanted to give a platform to historians. I didn't want it to be me showcasing what I know all the time. I wanted to be like 90-10. I wanted to have people on who had done historical work 90% of the time and showcase something that they were doing. And 10% of the time, it's like me showing you a historical site or something. So it wasn't me like tooting my own horn or anything. It was just me trying to get more history out to the masses and in new and exciting ways. And as we went over at the beginning, I'm reaching out on almost 10 platforms now to try to get this out to a new audience. And I think that's very important, especially the day and age that we live in. And I've had a lot of fun working alongside the National Park Service, especially Gettysburg National Military Park, other institutions, including, with you, and working alongside the Civil War Institute, which we've been doing a lot of hardcore stuff now that we've been going through the pandemic. and George Tyler Moore Center, and others as well. And I'm going to be taking this internationally very soon because this summer I'm going to be moving to Ontario, and I'll be pursuing my doctorate in history at Western University. So I may have a little time off just to get acquainted with my new surroundings, but then I'm going to be kicking off and doing this internationally.
Yeah, you're going to be bringing us all the Canadian history, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be, my dissertation idea is basically a transnational history. So it's Americans going to Canada to fight in the First World War. So I want to bring transnational history to my page as well. So we'll do history from both sides of the border. So.
Great. We're getting lots of people saying hi to you, so I'm glad we've gotten a lot of the tattooed historian audience here with us. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, if you're a big fan of John and John's work, and you're enjoying this conversation, give us a like on Facebook, like the video, share the video. That helps more people to join in the conversation. So with all that being said, John, I really want to dive into today's topic. So I'm going to step away. I'm still going to be here, but I'm going to turn over the floor to you, John, and tell us a little bit about hygiene and nutrition in Civil War soldiers.
Sure. Well, before I go into the screen sharing portion of this presentation, I want to let everyone know that this all started off basically years and years ago. I was a historical interpreter, reenactor for years, a quarter of a century, which makes me feel ancient. And the one thing that I loved to do in the field was I loved to cook, and I loved to talk about rations. It was something that everyone could connect to. And we could also talk about cleanliness and trying to stay clean in the field, because I was a pretty hardcore, what they called campaigner. And my best friend at times was Lye Soap, and we got to hang out and have a good time together with our comrades, our friends out there, other history nerds, hanging out and doing great things. And it seemed like I was always the guy that got to cook for everybody in the little mess, as we called them, 3 or 4 people hanging out together and putting their rations together. There was even a time where we found blueberries along the side of the road, and I made a blueberry cobbler in the field. So I thought, well, maybe I should look at food history a little bit. And Jake asked me to come on and speak about food and hygiene. And so what I'm going to present to you today is a little bit of a background on each thing, especially the food portion, since that is my go-to a lot, and I love to eat. So I'm going to be talking about that a lot. But this is by no means an overarching, great narrative of it. This is an introductory piece. This is to spark your curiosity, and hopefully you can reach out in the comment section with any questions that you may have. If I can't answer it, maybe Jake can here later on, because this is a partnership, and we're working together to give you the best possible live stream that we can. With that in mind, I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation, and forgive me if my screen sharing ability is a little rusty right now, but I've been doing so many interviews that I'm mainly used to speaking with someone and not doing a screen share. But food and hygiene in the Civil War is just an awesome topic, and it's something that we often take for granted, especially the food portion of it. What did these men eat? How did they survive in the field? And hygiene, we can talk about in general as an overarching theme of the project. When these men are in the field and they are out among their comrades, and obviously in the photo they're not social distancing like we are, the full campaign ration that these men in this lithograph we're supposed to get is 1 pound of hardtack, 3/4 pounds of salt pork, or 1 1/4 pounds of fresh meat, salt, sugar, coffee. This equates to roughly 4,000 calories. So you're looking at basically the caloric intake of what our modern troops should be getting, about 4,000 calories or so per day, 4,000 calories per day. But on campaign, which is you're marching, you're camping for the night, you may be moving the next day, you're moving around a lot on campaign. Take that 4,000 calorie intake, and let's look at, for instance, the Gettysburg campaign. June, July, 1863. The average soldier at Gettysburg and the campaign overall is going to ingest about 1,800 calories a day. So they're not getting half of what they're supposed to be getting per day. This, causes fatigue. It causes men to drop out of ranks, et cetera, et cetera. I believe 1,800 calories today is basically what the caloric intake is of those who live currently in like the Congo. It's about 1,800 calories a day to 2,000 calories. So that's what these Civil War soldiers are ingesting each day. John Billings wrote a list of what he received during his service in his great book, Hardtack and Coffee, which I actually have a tattoo of a lithograph out of Hardtack and Coffee, which isn't surprising probably to Jake.
Not surprising in the least.
John Billings wrote salt pork, fresh beef, salt beef, rarely ham or bacon, hard bread, soft bread, potatoes, an occasional onion, flour, beans, split peas, rice, dried apples, dried peaches, desiccated vegetables, which we'll go over later, coffee, tea, sugar, molasses, vinegar, candles, soap, pepper, and salt. That's what Billings said he saw all throughout his service in the Union Army during the American Civil War. A soldier with the 6th Indiana said his comrades were, quote, starved into walking skeletons, pale, thin-faced, sickly-looking men, so weak they would stagger as they walked. Captain A.W. Atchison, 140th Pennsylvania. I haven't eaten enough to keep a sick kitten alive. Often we get a meal a day, but oftener a meal in 2 days. One New Jersey soldier said, our soup, coffee, and meat were boiled in camp kettles, which were also used for boiling our dirty clothes, which we'll go over in a little while. But as you see before you on the screen is the meat ration, one of my favorites, salt pork. And you can see why it's called salt pork by this photo. Company cooks, when situated in long-term camps and not out on campaign, they tended to boil salt pork. Many simply poked it with sticks to see if it was done or not, and it usually was not. It was usually undercooked, and that caused many problems. Men on campaign tended to fry their pork, and they would some would actually try to eat it raw, sandwiched between 2 pieces of hardtack. So you can imagine what's going to happen when they're eating this stuff raw. Back to Billings. Billings says, many of us have since learned to call it the indigestible ration, but we ignored the existence of such a thing as a stomach in the Army and then regarded pork as an indispensable one. When salt pork wasn't available, substitutions would be made, such as beef or ham. Some men had to learn to deal with ill-prepared meat all the time. One North Carolina soldier stated, I learned to eat fat bacon raw and to like it. At times, soldiers simply set out their supply of meat in the sun, thinking that the sun could bake it and it will be fine. One of the biggest ones everyone talks about, hardtack. You also have soft bread and cornmeal, which we'll go over. But basically the other indispensable ration, hardtack had been around since the 18th century. It was called a ship biscuit, and later on it'd be known as hardtack. We issued hardtack to our troops in the U.S. Army all the way up through the First World War. So this isn't just a Civil War thing. This is something that goes over 3 centuries. Hardtack usually came in large boxes, stenciled with BC for brigade commissary. Many men swore this actually was the date of when this stuff was manufactured, before Christ. Men in the Union Army would tend to receive about 9 crackers per ration issue. So you're getting 9 of these things to ingest. And what it does is hardtack, this is just flour and water, gets into your stomach and it expands. It makes you feel like you've eaten more than you actually have. These can be prepared in different ways. Skilligalee was one way. It was soaked hardtack fried in pork grease, which was the way I used to eat it in the field, and I'm still alive, thankfully. I probably got bad calories from it, and cholesterol. But I used to soak it when I was a living history interpreter. I would put it in a cup of water, soak my hardtack while I fried my salt pork. When I was done frying the salt pork, you throw in the slightly softened hardtack, and it was kind of like a fried bread. That's called skilligalee. Hellfire stew was another one. You crushed the hardtack, you soaked it, and then you fried it. And one other one is lob course. It's salt pork, hardtack, and whatever is available in a stew, or as we used to call it, a guess soup, because you had to guess what's inside it. When hardtack wasn't available, flour or soft bread was usually issued to the federal soldier. In 1861, there was a small period of time where soft bread was baked under the terrace on the west side of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., in makeshift bakeries. These ovens could produce about 16,000 loaves of bread per day. So you can imagine the logistical issues that are going on. What's happening logistically with all these loaves of bread. In 1864, during the overland campaigns, Ulysses S. Grant had a bakery put into operation at City Point, Virginia. These were staffed by professional bakers, and they produced 123,000 loaves of bread for the Union Army. Cornmeal was often issued to Confederate troops in great numbers. Many varieties of recipes came out of this essential ingredient of their diet. However, as the war progressed, the quality of that cornmeal declines. And one rebel stated at the time of the Gettysburg campaign that cornmeal was, quote, nothing more or less than a mixture of corn cobs, husks, and sawdust. Full rations consisted of a pound of this and a quarter pound of fat pork. This one gets a lot of people's attention. Desiccated vegetables. What are desiccated vegetables? Well, let's go back to Billings. Billings is my man. We're going back to hardtack and coffee. Billings says, quote, this consisted of a small piece per man, an ounce in weight, and 2 or 3 inches cube of a sheet or block of vegetables, which had been prepared and apparently kiln dried as sanitary fodder for the soldiers. Billings went on to say that when expanded in water, quote, it seemed to show, and I think really did show, the layers of cabbage leaves and turnip tops stratified with layers of sliced carrots, turnips, parsnips, a bare suggestion of onions, and some other among known vegetable quantities, with a large residuum of insoluble and insolvable material which appeared to play the part of warp to the fabric, but which defied the powers of the analysts to give it a name. So even they couldn't come up and understand what the heck was in this stuff. Many soldiers just started calling it desecrated vegetables instead of desiccated vegetables. Scurvy ran rampant through these armies due to these poor vegetable diets and lack of fruits. It wasn't until about 1864 that federal troops started to see a large influx of fresh fruits and vegetables. And this is mostly supplied by the U.S. Sanitary Commission, who came in and cleaned up a lot of the camps, which we'll go over in a little bit, and also helped out with the food storage and foodstuffs. Now, my favorite of all, coffee, the biggest morale booster in the world. I went to get my coffee this morning and they weren't open yet, and my morale dropped and sank. So you can imagine when you're out in the field what it's like. One surgeon in 1864 stated that the wounded seemed to have little or no power because they had no coffee before they went into battle. Some surgeons actually told the men to drink coffee instead of straight water because it was healthier for them, boiling off all that stuff in the water. This led to many cases of dehydration. You can imagine if you're just ingesting coffee all the time, you're going to get dehydrated. However, soldiers were known to get water any way they could, even if it was detrimental to their health. On July 2nd, 1863, members of the 4th Michigan, located near the Weichert Farm at Gettysburg, filled their canteens in a nearby ditch. The stagnant water would be repulsive to you or I, but the soldiers simply pushed, quote, the green scum on the surface aside with their tin cups, and slapping the surface to sink the bugs and wigglers to the bottom, they plunged their canteens to fill them up. Union Surgeon A.C. Swartwelder, I knew I was going to mess his name up, Swartwelder. He said, quote, I'm thoroughly convinced that a pint of good coffee is a better beverage for the soldier than all the rye, bourbon, brandy, or any alcoholic nostrum that ever flowed from a worm. It has no equal as preparation for a hard day's march, nor any restorative after one. Alfred Ballard, 5th New Jersey, quote, coffee and sugar we kept in a bag together, and when we wanted a cup of coffee, we put 2 tablespoons full of the mixture in a pint cup of water, and placing the cup on 2 sticks with some hot coals beneath it, let it boil. Now, the Confederates had a harder time because of the blockade, as that Anaconda Plan starts to squeeze the Confederacy with its blockade. Many Confederates had to substitute coffee. They used potatoes, peanuts, corn, and peas to make a coffee substitute. So you can imagine the quality of that declines as well. Hygiene. I know that for some interpreters out there and reenactors, many of us wouldn't bathe all weekend, and after 3 days, we smelled pretty bad out there. So you can imagine going weeks at a time without getting a bath. Joseph Woodward was a surgeon in the U.S. Army at the time. He said, quote, in great armies in time of war, personal cleanliness is often non-existent. The men are unwashed, their clothes filthy, bodies full of vermin, and heaps of garbage lie about. Especially needed was policing the latrines. The trench is too shallow, daily covering is not there, and the dirt is entirely neglected. Large numbers of the men will not use the sinks or latrines, but instead every clump of bushes and every fence border. It is impossible to step outside the encampment without having both eye and nostril continually offended. So that's one of the best quotes about hygiene I ever found out there in the archive. It's just so dramatic, and it makes you think of the pungent smells and just what's going on around you at that time. One inspector went into the Union camps, and he said, the quote, they were littered with refuse, food, and other rubbish, sometimes in an offensive state of decomposition. He also found, quote, slops deposited in pits within the camp limits or thrown out of broadcasts, heaps of manure, and awful close to the camp. Officials and a lot of the officers, especially line officers, originally wanted their men to bathe about once per week. That's what they figured was enough. Just bathe once a week. However, men bathed only when they had the opportunity, like these men in the river here. And that meant sometimes not only weeks, but sometimes months without bathing properly, as we would consider it today. Of course, a proper bath was different for everyone. It was due to this fact that these men weren't bathing all the time, or at least weekly, that you could smell an army before you could see them. Men often hadn't bathed in a month or two, and now they're camping close together, and they're all staying close together. So you can imagine what that smell would have been, or maybe you don't want to imagine what that smell would have been. One of the worst, the graybacks, and I'm not talking Confederates. I'm talking about these little guys, lice. These would be an issue for the U.S. Army for years and years and years. As a guy who also dabbles in the First World War, this is where the term cooties comes from. Cooties are lice, and the men in the Civil War were calling them graybacks. One soldier recalled, I once heard the orderly of a company officer relate that he had picked 52 graybacks from the shirt of his chief in one sitting. So these lice would get into the seams of your clothes, and they would nest in there, and you would have to try to dig them out. So you would find soldiers digging lice off of their buddy or out of their own jacket as the soldiers sitting there under the tree in that drawing showcases. The best course of action was to either boil the uniform in a large pot of water, remember, also the pot used for making your food, or expose the lice to extreme heat over a campfire. These poor sanitary conditions in and around camp caused a whole host of diseases to pop up in Civil War armies. Dysentery. ravaged both forces during the war, probably accounting for close to 100,000 deaths. Cases of latrines being too close to water sources, especially early on in the conflict, were prevalent. Contaminated water could be found in thousands of canteens throughout the war. This, as well as poorly cooked rations, often led to typhoid cases, all those cases of dysentery that I just went over. Roughly 30% of those, though, who contracted typhoid would perish from it. And this, on the right, is an enhanced photo of a latrine with the log that you would sit on, and the latrine or sink itself behind it. That sink is supposed to be 5 feet deep. It hardly ever was unless you were in a camp for a long period of time. And on the left of your screen, you will see a latrine in the middle of the field there with its log that you would sit on. And look at the close proximity of the camp as well. If there's any runoff, a lot of those men are going to be in trouble. John Strong Newberry was a doctor. He was with the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and this is when things start to change. The Sanitary Commission comes in, as you've heard with Jake on some of his other live streams, and they start to clean up a lot of these areas. Newberry sees this stuff in late 1861, so it's early in the war, and he sees that the latrine, quote, is the ground in the vicinity which slopes down to the stream from which all water in the camp is obtained. So they're putting these sometimes on higher ground, and it's running off in the rainwater. The close proximity in which the men lived together also permitted measles and tuberculosis to make its appearance in camp. Camp life was not a clean or safe environment. You could see all the men gathered together in large clumps, and some of these men had never been around these diseases before, especially men who came from sparsely populated areas of the country. Units who came from densely populated areas of the country seemed to have a better time with what we would consider childhood diseases. They had already been through that as a child and had overcome it. Now you're starting to see men from the country come out, farmers and such, who had never been exposed not only to this amount of people, but also these childhood diseases. And it starts to ravage the camps in Civil War armies. What this all comes down to with these diseases and dirty conditions, etc., comes down to 3 things. One is overcrowding in camps, including men and animals living near each other. And as you can see in this photo, we have horses just on the exterior of this camp line. Sometimes horses and mules are put on the high ground, and you can imagine what happens in the rainwater that comes down through the area. The second is objectives involving the ending of the war always took precedence, or usually took precedence, over sanitation issues. Just get the war done. We're not going to worry about how clean the camp is. And also poor environmental conditions. They are out in various forms of weather, many times with one blanket, maybe a rubberized blanket. It's not good protection. There are just times where the environment plays key factors in sickening the army, and a lot of these men end up in hospitals. As Jake eloquently puts in many of his presentations, he knows hospitals better than I do, obviously, but these hospitals are filled with men who are suffering from diseases in camp which could have been prevented because they didn't have proper sanitary issues. Hygiene was not of the utmost importance. Ending the war was of the most importance to many of the commanders. It came down to civilian organizations like the Sanitary Commission to try to come in and help these men along. But with the foodstuffs, it also came down to you were eating off the same plate every day and you weren't washing the plates. The U.S. Army had not started issuing utensils yet, so you were using the same utensils over and over again and not washing them as well, if you even had proper utensils. And you were doing camp duties in the same pots where you were also making your food. And obviously, that's going to create a lot of problems with an outbreak of diseases or other things going on in camp and especially with dysentery issues and such. So with all this combining into one, you start to see that you have just as many threats to your existence, your life, your health, as much as you do in battle, if not more so, because as we know, and as you've heard time and again on this site and others, you're more likely to die from disease than you are from combat. These are some of the reasons why. You either have a poor diet or you are in an area where hygiene is not of the utmost importance to whomever may be around. So I hope with that in mind, we can have further discussion about this in the comment section, or if Jake, if you have some things you would like to interject with, because I would love to hear your take on some of, especially the hygiene too.
Yeah.
That's your
no, that was great, John. Thank you so much. And we did get some good questions from the comments. I took the last time we did a video on Monday, we got inundated with comments and then I couldn't find them all. So as you were speaking, I was writing them down. So I do have many questions and comments here. Just two comments I thought that I would like to highlight that I enjoyed reading through them as you were speaking. Sure. A good friend of ours, Dean, is part of the Blue and Gray Hospital Association. He's watching. Hi, Dean, if you're still here. He mentioned going back to food and cooking. He said, "Hi, fellas. I always smell the meat first. If I don't vomit first, it's edible."
Yes. That was a thing with the men when they were issued the meat. You better cook that ration quickly, even though it had been cured in salt for months. You're starting to get there'll be a green tint to it after about a day, and what many times what I would do out in the field was I would boil it first because he didn't want it to turn green, because I may not get to eat it until Sunday and it comes out in the field on Friday. My haversack is going to smell terrible.
Yikes. Yeah. Another comment here is from Ryan. Ryan's been watching a lot of our videos. Thanks for tuning in, Ryan. He says that it sounds like our group needs to work a lot harder to be authentic.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, you don't know the problem till you acknowledge it, right? So, but no, you don't have to worry about the disease part to be authentic. Please don't go out there and eat raw salt pork between two pieces of hardtack, but
Civil War sushi.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, I always felt like having good food made properly in a field always made an interpretive experience better. I was always trying to do that as often as possible. And that's one way, if you're an interpreter or reenactor, to really up your game, is to actually try to live out your haversack for a whole weekend, and you'll see how tough it actually can be.
Yeah. So question kind of on that about cooking and food. This comes from Andrea. Andrea's been watching a lot of our videos too. Thanks, Andrea. She asked, way up at the beginning of your food conversation, were cooks generally decent cooks when good stuff was available back then?
Yeah. That's a great question, because men are always going to complain about the food, and you could have the best ingredients and yet you're not going to please everybody. However, usually what would happen is the men would figure out, okay, this guy is the best cook in our mess. We'll have him do the duty of that, and we'll help him with something else. You traded off things. You're like, well, you can sew and I can't, but I can cook. So can you sew this and I'll cook, and etc. If you're in a stagnant camp, like a winter encampment, many times what they would do is they would take 3 or 4 different guys who were really good at it, put them in a location that's considered a kitchen, and allow them to do their work. You ate in groups of 3 or 4 called a mess. You would get together, like Jake and myself and 2 other people would get together. We would put our rations together and then we would cook them. Well, maybe Jake figures out that I'm a better cook than him, or vice versa. When we get to a winter encampment, we'll be like, hey, this guy can really cook. Put him over there to work on that. And this guy can sit and peel potatoes all day. So you just tried to work out who's the better cook. And you've been around each other for not only the time you've been in service, but you grew up in the same town. So maybe this guy, is known for being a great baker. Well, we're going to make him bake. So it all works out in the end, but you're always going to have guys that complain about the food.
Yeah, Yeah, it's like a military story as old as time itself.
Yeah. I'm sure you could find Romans complaining about, the cook.
Yep.
Okay.
So quick transition away from food over to hygiene. I think this is, I know a little bit about this topic. I think you as an interpreter and a living historian might have some info that would be of use too. First one, we had a couple of questions about teeth and about, toothbrushing, that sort of thing. So what can you say about dental hygiene?
That's a great question. I should have thought about putting that in there. At the time during the Civil War, you could get tooth powder. So you'd mix that powder into water, or mix water into the powder, and you would create a paste. It's a toothpaste. A lot of times, two things can happen. One, you're either not near it, or the sutler doesn't carry it at that time. Or two, you just need to basically take ashes out of the fire pit. And you've seen charcoal toothpaste. It's like charcoal toothpaste. You take ashes out of the fire pit, put it on there, and you start scrubbing. And many of these men had very nice teeth because of that, if they could keep their teeth. Nice pearly whites, because that is one of the best ways to clean your teeth in the field. I've done it. I know a lot of the hardcore guys have done it. Guys and gals have done it. Where you just take ashes from the fire, put a little bit of water on there to make it soluble, and you just start scrubbing. And that's one way to do it. With tooth powder, like I said, the sutler may not have it at that time, or you may not be near a town where you can get it. Or the other thing that usually happened was guys would put it in their pack or something, and they'd open their pack up, and now tooth powder is just everywhere, and it's all over everything. And they just decided, heck with that, I'm just going to deal with the ashes and the fires. My stuff isn't covered in powder.
Yeah, that's how we have in our collection at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We do have tooth powder, which I was always intrigued by it, and then I found out what like the leading ingredient was in it, and it was chalk, and I was just like, no thanks. I'll go with the ashes and the fire sound better.
Either way, you're going to have a gritty taste in there, and I'd rather have ashes from the fire too.
So another question that came in through comments, I saw a couple of people asking this, and it's very relevant. Speaking of, back at the beginning, is saying about the museum wanting to be relevant and bringing in history to connections today. How about toilet paper? You talked a little bit about latrines. So what are we wiping our butts with in the Civil War?
Oh man, there's all kinds of ways to get that job done. There is a lot of paper floating around camp, and that's no pun. That you could find paper readily available. Some men resorted to using the old corn cob way of doing things when it was in season. And many times, sad to say, some men didn't do it enough. And that's what created that smell around camp was the fact that they weren't properly keeping themselves clean. But you could find ways to do it. The old leaf is a good way to do it, obviously, if you're running out of paper. But they made do with what they had. There's no 1 or 2 ply though. It's all in what you get. You get what you get. But there were different ways of doing it. And you see different people commenting on it once in a while, but it's a rare thing because it's something they took for granted. They're not going to put it in their journal how they did that, but it's a great question, and it all depends on locale, what's around, and stuff like that, which is fundamentally the Civil War in general with camp life. Whatever's around is what they used, and it's different for each geographic region.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's a lot that I don't know. I don't think about often. I work in a Civil War medicine museum, and we talk a lot about poop. That's one, honestly, that I didn't really talk about. And I have to say, like, as the toilet paper shortage that we all experienced in the last, approaching now 2 months, I heard for the first time about the whole corn cob thing. And I have to tell you, I was mildly disturbed by that.
Well, you eat the corn first. But yeah,
right,
the corn.
Right.
Cob, yeah,
that doesn't make it any better.
Don't ruin the corn, man. No, that's what I've heard. People doing that in the Depression. So, you know, it was still around in the 20th century. So, yeah, I mean, that was used during the Civil War as well, and out in the field. And, you know, we go to Target or Walmart to get our toilet paper. These guys went to the winter hut kitchen and got, you know, got whatever they needed. So,
Right. Right. So gonna go back to, I know you're you know, most interested in the food. So I want to kind of keep a lot of the questions kind of, I want to take them back to food. We did get one question I saw repeatedly, a viewer who watches many of our videos, Chris, asked about peanuts in terms of rations and food. Can you speak a little bit about peanuts?
Peanuts were definitely around. I mean, they made a great song called Goober Peas because of peanuts.
I hate that song. I hate that song so much.
Yeah, I heard it too much in the 90s. You know, when I really started to get into reenacting and everyone was singing it, and I'm like, God, please let it stop. But yeah, peanuts were definitely around, and the men were chomping on them as much as they could. It's kind of like the old sunflower seed habit, you know, where it was just something to eat past the time and throw at each other, and you know, all this stuff. But basically, like when we have a mix of something like a trail mix or something, that was peanuts to them. That was what they were eating and such in their downtime. So you could find men with, you know, handfuls of peanuts in their haversacks, which is the haversack, for those of you who don't know, or I've been talking about it, is where you keep your food. That's only for food. That's what's in your haversack. You know, you can keep your plate in there if you like, but men would have stuff in there by the handfuls sometimes. And they had something called ditty bags, or you know, little bags that they had sewn up, and they could keep coffee in them, or they could keep peanuts in them, or whatever they found along the road. And remember, that's all going to slowly start to gel together after a while. And the haversack was a very disgusting place after a while.
Yeah, I can't even imagine I mean, a lot of what we talked about today is just the smells. I mean, just the smells of all of these things are just kind of unimaginable. We have a camp life display at the museum, and I always make a joke when we bring tours in there and say, you know, it's one thing to look at this, but try to imagine the smells. And if only we could have a, you know, I know some institutions and museums have smelling machines, but I think it would be too off-putting for someone to walk in there. They would not spend much time in that display, which is my favorite one in the museum, because it's all of these things that we were talking about today. On smelling machines, I will throw a shout out to John. I don't know if you've been there, but to Ben Lomond down at Manassas.
Yes.
Yeah. They have used as a hospital after First Bull Run, First Manassas. A soldier, an officer in the Confederate Army, died of gangrene in his chest. And so they made the decision to make it smell like gangrene. And let me tell you, it is a memorable experience. But they do a wonderful job down there interpreting smells, not only, of course, gangrene, but also many of the other smells associated with the Civil War. But I think camp life would probably be too repulsive to our modern sensibilities.
Oh yeah, and that's something we don't get when we go to reenactments, right? We don't understand that kind of thing, because everyone has just bathed that Friday morning before going out to an event or whatever else. We don't get the smells. But I will say that as far as the Civil War field is concerned, there are a lot of people looking at the sensory issues in the Civil War for books. We've had an uptick in environmental histories, and we've also had an uptick in sensory histories, which I think is fantastic, because as an interpreter, I always like to touch on all your senses. You know, what would this have smelled like? What would this have tasted like? Well, now we're starting to see it in book form en masse, and I'm really happy to see that, because that's really going to bring this alive for a lot of people. Obviously, it's not going to be a book where it's like a scratch and sniff book, but that would be fantastic if we could do that. I'd be all over that.
All over. John's in support of the scratch and sniff Civil War history book.
If there's a pop-up book of phobias, we should be able to do that.
I think we could someone probably is probably working on that somewhere. I just have a feeling, you know. So talking about nasty smells immediately made me think of this question for you, as you know, you said you've been doing living history and interpreting for you know, what do you say, 25 years?
25 years. Yeah.
25 years.
Yeah.
So immediately I go to the best and the worst. So what was the worst meal you ever had doing your living history thing?
I once had undercooked chicken one time, and everyone got sick, and it was like seriously undercooked, and we ate it because we were so hungry in the field, and that took a toll on a lot of us. We had some issues where like, well, this is kind of like dysentery, and you know, there's about 10 of us who ate it, and it was like this entire company's out of commission right now because we're all grumbling and groaning because our stomachs hurt and we're going to the bathroom all the time. Probably the worst one I ever had. Did you ask me what the best one was, or just?
Yeah. What's you already mentioned blueberry cobbler, which sounds damn good.
Yeah, that was my best creation.
Okay.
Because we were doing a Confederate living history, and we were doing a road march, and I saw blueberries, and I had an English mess tin, which sits about this high, and you can see it coming into the Confederate Army, especially in 63, 64. And I had cornmeal and molasses, and I'm like, well, we can make this into a blueberry cobbler in no time. And we did that. And that really showed us how sometimes we get lucky, you know, and we make something really cool. We made that, and I'd have to think of what else we really made really well in the field, because we basically stuck with the, you know, the necessities or whatever we would have been issued. The best thing I ever made, though, in the field was actually during a Mexican-American War event. So I went back and did Mexican-American War for a little while, and we did, I did steamed mussels in the field for Veracruz, and we made guacamole in the field before it was a hipster thing. And it was great. So we had a great time with that, you know, and we were the OG hipsters. We were out there, you know, with we didn't have toast, but we made guacamole in the field, which was awesome, and wearing 1840 stuff.
So that makes me think, like, so the inspiration, obviously you guys are, you know, legit do your research. So there is primary sources and talking about them even eating avocados down there in Mexico.
There's a great book called Chronicles of the Gringos, and it's a classic Mexican-American War book, and it's basically like the Hardtack and Coffee, but for Mexican-American War in the 1840s. And we go into these resources where it's in the Mexican-American War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and we pull these little snippets out to try to be like, well, let's try this weekend, or let's have this going on. And after a while, I sold my muskets because I'd rather do this. I'd rather do some interesting things according to foodstuffs or whatever, because we had gotten so many of these primary sources out, and I just like to try to cook in the field over an open fire and see how it goes. And you can definitely find it from time to time in the primary research, as far as what they're eating, or in the case of when we did Mexican-American War, we even found out that they were smoking tobacco out of corn husk. So we were smoking tobacco out of corn husk for the weekend to try it, see what it was like. And, you know, you find them from time to time. It just makes your weekend go a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I love that, you know, applying history like that, you know, taking what's in the books and, you know, deciding, hey, let's, you know, see what this tastes like. Let's see what this is like, what this experience is. Gets you a little bit closer to that kind of, I know authenticity is a big word for you, John. So it gets you to that authentic experience. In this case of the Mexican-American War, which I guilty don't have too much familiarity with. I'm trying to fix that, but lots of lessons in there for those interested in the Civil War, for sure.
Yeah, if you like a lot of Mexican dishes, this is where Americans really start to find out what that actually is. So, right. And this is the training ground for these guys in the American Civil War. They're learning from their experience in the 1840s, and not only on the battlefield, but also in the kitchens. What are they going to make and stuff like that. So, you know, it's the one part of the movie Gettysburg that I loved was Buster Kilrain talking about his service way back when. It's like there was an old guy in your unit who is exactly like that. And it's still true today. You know, I had friends who were in the invasion of Iraq, and they had an old sergeant who was in the first Gulf War, It's the same thing. It's a timeless story, and talking about food and talking about how to properly take care of yourself in the military is a timeless story as well. It goes back to ancient times, and that's why a thing like this, a presentation like this, is so important for your viewers and for my viewers who may be watching as well, because we tend to think about the operational history, the tactics and all that stuff, and we tend to forget about what are these guys actually eating and how is this impacting what they do on the battlefield. And I think it's an awesome subject, and that's why I was so attracted to food in the field. Not only did I want to eat well and go home healthy, but I also wanted to figure out how did they do it.
Right. So other food related question that kind of came to mind for me, I have not done any living history myself. Wool in the summertime, just that was a big thing for me. I was like, that sounds unpleasant. I'm not doing it. I'm gonna enjoy the comforts of a 21st century life.
Right.
But have you eaten the desiccated vegetables?
I have not personally had it, although I know that really good living historians are starting to make it before they go out in the field. I have never personally had desiccated vegetables, but I know that a few have, quite a few have, in the campaigner world. And it's just awesome to see them experimenting with it, because back in the day, we never tried it. So you're starting to see them try new and different things. Yeah, I would try it just to see what it's like, but I saw it when they made it, and I'm like, oh, that does not look appealing at all. so, but I would try just to say I tried it, you know.
Yeah, I have not seen it, have not like seen it done, have not, but I don't know. I feel like the food I think is more accessible to me. I think I would try most of this food. But yeah, the whole get up and the whole you know, that life, the living history life ain't for me, I'm afraid.
All being self-aware, buddy. Whatever goes for you. I mean, I got to the point where my back started hurting too much, and I'm like, maybe it's time for me to retire. And the young guy started calling me Pop. So I'm like,
yeah. There you go. You're filling in that Buster Kilrain role.
Yeah.
You've seen it all before.
Yeah, it's the first few thousand miles.
So I want to transition now a little bit away to talk about some of the cool stuff that you're doing. We talked about it at the beginning, but I think that, you know, John, you bring such a cool perspective to the table here. So I want to kind of give you the floor to talk about kind of what are some of your thoughts about history and how we can apply it. We had a question about this, about like, does John apply history to every aspect of his life? You know, to try to get to you know, what's your philosophy behind Tattooed Historian, and what are people going to see if they come and follow your channels?
That's a great question, and it's a wild thing to think about, but I'm always myself. I don't put on a guise. I don't put on, you know, an air of ego or anything. I'm a very humble person. Jake knows that personally. He knows me personally. He understands that. But I've always felt like, someone asked me one time, what's the model for the Tattooed Historian? Like, if you had to describe it, what would it be? And I never wanted to be like anybody else, but I said, it's kind of like mixing Ken Burns with Anthony Bourdain. It's edgy, but yet it's primary source driven, and we can learn something about culture and history, et cetera, from it. I've always just wanted to be giving a legacy to a field that I love. And I saw where the internet and social media, especially, and things like this, have leveled the playing field. And now we can work together in new and exciting ways, no matter what strata of the field we're in, whether we're a reenactor, whether we're a public historian who's working in a museum, whether we are an academic. I'm starting to see the level of that playing field. And in some ways, in the early days, I received some blowback from that because some people weren't ready. But now, with the conditions that we're going through, you see a lot more of embracing this new fashion of doing history. Doing history has changed over the last 20 years. And what I like to do is create an open environment for people to come in and be a part of it, and understand that history is freaking cool. You know, history is a very cool thing to study. And when people are like, oh, I don't like history, well, you have a history. Everything you do has a history. Everything you come into contact with has a history. And so it's just, the problem is that once in a while you get that monotone person who makes history not cool, and history is boring, or you have to know dates, times, and all that stuff, and it's just memorization. That's not cool. I had teachers like that, and I hated history class, but then I started to embrace it in a new way, because I was starting to see that we needed a new way of having new voices come out of the woodwork, because so many people, wanted to be heard, and wanted to have their paper presented, or wanted to come on and talk about something on the podcast, or they're involved in a preservation effort, but they weren't being heard because they weren't given a platform by someone who had, quote, power. And when I started doing the brand, I did it because I wanted to lend a voice, not only my own, but a lot of other voices, to the history field. And luckily, a lot of people have gravitated towards it. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's kind of weird and awkward to hear people in the street go, hey, you're the tattooed historian, just walking down the street. And I'm like, okay, this is wild. But I love meeting people who follow the page, or who have heard of the programming, because it means that it's making a little bit of an impact on someone's life in a good way. And my content has always been about creating value for the audience. It's never been about stroking my own ego or trying to get a certain number of followers. It's always just been about getting the history out there that's real history, and enjoying it every step of the way, enjoying the process.
Yeah, and it's what I think you've found this. We've certainly found this at the museum. If you tell a compelling story and you talk to compelling people and you present it in a way that you find passion from it, people are going to pick up on that. And it gets to that authenticity and, getting the real story, told by somebody who loves telling that story means all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sense and pick up on that passion. Since you mentioned ego, John, I have a comment here that comes from someone you know and you work with on a, I think you said twice a week. This question, I'm not going to say who said it, but I think you're going to know immediately who said this. The question is it true that John believes that Pete Carmichael is an egomaniac and should be suppressed like the miscreant Pope must be suppressed?
No, he is not.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Pete. I had to laugh the other night because we had Carolyn Janney on, and Pete and I have been going back and forth about our twice a week live stream. We need to have intro music or something. And I said, we need to have The Show Must Go On by Queen. And he's like, I don't know that song. And I'm like, how do you not know? He's like, I don't listen to Queen, although I hear that Johnny Mercury is a great vocalist. I'm like, you mean Freddie Mercury? And so it started, but right there, Pete, thank you for that. You're right there is a great thing. 20 years ago, Pete and I would have probably never even heard of each other. I would have heard of him, but he probably never would have heard of me, because I was, I would have been working in archive, whatever. The internet and social media has allowed us to have this ability to collaborate in new ways. And I am loving working with Pete because we can be ourselves together. And, that's so much fun when you don't have to put on a guise. You can just be yourself. And, like you said, the authenticity of the moment, just be yourself. And if people don't like what you do, they won't follow you. So you just get up the next day and you do your thing. And I don't like it when people pander for follows or anything like that. I like it when you just do it organically and just love the moment and put yourself out there. And whatever you do, I don't care if you're a historian or if you're flipping sneakers, just whatever you do it the way you wish to be remembered. And that's my thing. So I've not only become a historian, but some people have said you've become like a motivational speaker. Sometimes I get on my soapbox and I'm like, dude, this is the way I see it. And, as far as I want everyone to do what they love, but also to be real, just be real. Right. And it just so happens that I'm a historian who just likes to keep it real and heavily tattooed.
Yes, yes. So, and we were speaking about Pete Carmichael. He's head of things up at Gettysburg College's Civil War Institute.
Right.
Has a fantastic book. I'll shout out to War for the Common Soldier. Is by Pete is amazing. It's a great book, worth picking up. Well, John, we're a little over time, so thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate coming on and chatting with us. And yeah, thanks so much.
Hey, thank you, Jake. It's always a pleasure working with you, my friend.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Thank you all out there for tuning in with us today, for all the great questions that you asked, and we had a nice lively conversation going on in the comment threads, which we always love. If you are enjoying these videos, if you enjoyed this video, highly recommend becoming a member of the museum. You can play a part in supporting these efforts. You can become a part of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in ensuring that we continue to tell these stories, to talk to historians like John and many of the other historians we've talked to and will be continuing to talk to. Our next presentation is going to be on Friday morning at 10 o'clock, talking about irritable heart and the Civil War. So these are the kinds of conversations that you will be supporting if you donate or become a member of the museum. You can find that link in our comment section, pinned in the comment section. Click there. Every little bit helps. But also liking and sharing this video also will help more people see it. And that means that more people will get involved in these conversations and in future videos. So that's going to wrap it up for us today. I'm Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, signing off with John Heckman, the tattooed historian himself. Go like and follow all of John's pages wherever you may find them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Discord. Did I miss any?
Everywhere, yeah. Discord, yeah.
Snapchat. Go find Tattooed Historian on Snapchat. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.